I would like to very briefly comment your thesis that Western Christendom was much more than a religion. You mentioned a complex set of political and legal structures and so on and so forth. Could we say this also for Islam and even Judaism, in the sense that Islam, for example, is not only religion, it's also a culture and a civilization and a legal political system in its own right? How would you refer to that? Does Christian Europe still exist in your view? Europe of today, in any substantial sense, not just statistically speaking. I have in mind that Europe today is perhaps the only exception from the rule of desecularization in the world. As a sociologist, I must also point that out, with a very low church attendance even in Western Europe, even in the countries where Christianity is the state religion, such as Scandinavian countries, England, and so on. I also think of the importance of blood in ritual sacrifices in temple Judaism, not in rabbinical Judaism. I see that you would not agree that there is much more comparison between the rabbinical Judaism and Christianity in this regard, but I don't remember, at least in the first part, that you refer to temple Judaism, which is, I think, a very important locus in this context because of the sacrifices made in the temple, in the Second Temple in Jerusalem prior to 70 CE, where those who sacrificed animals, men of the families, would say, this is my body and this is my blood, or this is the body and blood given on behalf of Gil Anidjar, Milan Vukomanovic, and so on. And I see a certain transition to this image and symbol of Christ as a sacrificial offering. And Christianity picked that up from temple Judaism, I would say, and there's a strong connection in that. And I would even dare to say that Christian liturgy made this substitution of body and blood of the sacrificial animal into the body and blood of Christ, not only symbolically but even literally.
Although there is a comparative work to be done, and again, I would say that much has been done, there isn't much that actually argues, but perhaps there is a very singular dimension to Christianity when it comes to its rapport to blood. So my question back, in fact, would be, how is it that given that in Eastern Christianity, blood is as important at the symbolic level, at the liturgical level, how is it that race science, unless I'm mistaken, is not developed in Eastern Christendom? How is it that flesh and blood does not become the basis for law? How is it that economic thinking is not suffused by blood, when in fact in the West that is the case? So the answer cannot just be the liturgical and symbolic dimension of blood, although I do think that there's some extraordinary synergy that happens in the Western Christian world that makes blood into really the basis for, again, embryology, economy, medicine, etc., etc. So I don't have an answer for that. I can't explain why is it that, given that blood is equally important in Eastern Christianity as it is in Western Christianity, and you could argue in biblical religion or in all sacrificial context as it is in Western Christendom, it doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't lead to a kind of bloody thinking where everything is taught through blood. That is my concern, and that's where the force, if you want, of blood becomes relevant. It's not just that it's present or absent elsewhere; it's that it has a very particular history in Western Christendom. Which brings me back to the last point that you made: is Europe Christian still? The answer is, if blood is what I say it is, then Christianity once again is not a religion. So the way to measure whether Europe is still Christian is not to check whether people go to church. It's rather whether, for example, they still think of themselves as flesh and blood, whether they still think that religion and politics should be fundamentally different. So, you know, in the Judeo-Arab, the question of secularization was only relevant to ask if the Jew and the Arab constitute the two bodies of the enemy in the Middle Ages, do they still constitute the body of the enemy in the 20th century? And if the answer is yes, then Europe is as Christian as it has ever been. Not because nothing has changed in Europe, but because the enemy is the same enemy, thought along the same lines, using the same concepts and the same denegations and the same technologies of rule, in fact. Yes? Namely, once we're all against anti-Semitism and we want to protect the Jews from the Muslims, or we're going to say, no, we need to protect the Muslims and we have to criticize, say, Israel. Which, by the way, I'm not saying is wrong, yes? It's just that the way in which the process works, yes? If I ask you what is the problem in the Middle East, you're going to tell me Jews and Muslims, yes? Not American bombs, even though we all know that that's not a small part of the problem, yes? Not European diplomacy, even though we know it's not a small part of the problem. We will say, no, Jews and Muslims, they just don't get along. It's been forever like that, which is bullshit, yes? Sorry, it's just not true. So, so that's the question. Is Europe still Christian? If we understand that the question doesn't mean is Europe still religiously Christian, Christian in the narrow sense of is Europe still religious, then to this I agree with you. No, or Europe is no longer Christian.
Or is Europe still Christian, such as the United States, for example? Because in both cases we have Western Christendom influences the
yes, I actually
developments, and I tend to see Europe as a special case.
I know Europeans are very, very invested in being different from America, but I'm sorry. You know, family quarrels, narcissism of minor difference, Balkanization. Sorry, that was a joke. No, I think that the fact that the president of America say God bless America and the president of France doesn't say God bless France, it's not enough to convince me that that France is not a fundamentally Christian country. Did you see the demonstration they had yesterday against gay marriage? You know, there are things. In this case, actually, you could even argue that the way in which embryology, procreation, is understood is one of the ways in which transformation has occurred to Christianity, so that it's no longer, in America you hear people say, from the moment of conception, the person is alive. Now, person is a legal term. You cannot be a fetus and a person. It's a legal term. What, in fact, Christians are saying in America today is that there is no difference between law and biology. Now, I don't know how we might agree or disagree on reading the New Testament, but I believe there's a difference between flesh and spirit. So to actually say that there's no difference between biology and law, meaning that a person is a person from the moment of conception, is anti-Christian. And yet, these are the Christians who speak today. So whether Christianity is true to itself is another question. Whether these are good or bad Christians, it's also another question. They say they are Christian. Who am I to say, no, they're not? It's in the name of their Christianity that they say what they say. So there's two versions. There's the Christians who say they are Christians when in fact they have nothing to do with Christianity. And then you have those like the Europeans who say they are not Christians, and in fact they are very Christian, in a truer manner. So to that extent, yes, there are differences between America and Europe, but if we understand that Christianity is much more than a religion, much more than who goes to church, then I think minimally we need to ask again, but we need to ask differently.
Which religion is more true? Is my religion only one true in the world, or it is one among the other? We find that Islamic believers here in Balkans say that their religion is the only one true religion, the last one, the really more near the truth. So the next is Catholic, and the last of Christianity is Orthodox believer, who don't know much about religion, and they identify them that they are believer, but they don't know and don't practice much of that. But one research tried to find this spirit of morality, and is there differences between attitudes and religion, and they find that there is no differences. So I maybe connect that with your idea with blood as some what is similar with all people and why it is Christian key word or key for understanding of religion. I also have a question about Jehovah's Witness. As you know, they have one idea that the soul is in blood, and they don't have this kind of medicine and transfusion of blood. So in our research we find that Jehovah's Witness is most rejected as religion because of that belief that they don't like. It's death or life. They chose that but not blood.
First of all, the fact that they are vilified because they refuse medical treatment is in itself extraordinary. By now we know enough about modern medicine versus alternative medicine, and the fact that modern medicine is not always the better, to nonetheless be wondering about the normative force that medicine has acquired. Right, so there's a kind of Protestant ethic, in fact, that if you don't want to save yourself, then really you are doomed. But it does connect to blood, and in a very interesting way. In English, French, Spanish, Western languages, when God starts speaking with Noah and giving him some of the basic commandments, one of the things he tells Noah is not to eat the blood, yes? Which is interesting because it's taken to be one of the bases for kosher food, yes? When you eat kosher meat, it means, first of all, you eat meat that doesn't have any blood in it, right? From the moment it's killed in a particular manner so that the blood has to get out, and then it's also treated with salt and cleaning so that there's really no blood. And the source of that is that commandment early in the Bible. Now what's amazing is that in Western languages, when you read about that commandment, what you read is that the blood is the life. Blood is the life. And it's strange, but somehow it has a kind of medical echo, which makes sense. Yes, if you lose all your blood, you will die. On the other hand, if you lose all your head, you will also die, but we won't quibble. Apparently, the association seems understandable enough, right? Again, it's blood and murder. Now, what's really, really amazing is that the text does not say that. The Hebrew text doesn't say, in fact, nor the Hebrew, nor the Greek, the Septuagint, nor the Latin. They don't say blood is the life. They say blood is the soul. Right? The Latin has anima, the Greek has psyche, and the Hebrew is nephesh. Now, I started wondering when did this translation happen? And the earliest I could find is Luther. Luther translates soul, nephesh, anima, psyche, as life. Which again can be argued, but it's still very strange because soul is not the only part of life. Yes. The consequences, again, are very, very important because it produces this very strong association between blood and life and this very strong identification between the two terms. So it's part, in fact, of what I was trying to describe earlier, whereby blood becomes absolutely crucial to an understanding of everything. Right? And I think Luther is a very important point. So why is it, though, that medicine has become so normative that you cannot have any opposition to it? That you cannot say, I mean, by now there's even researchers that said that transfusion is in fact a complete mistake. It was, it's a chapter in the history of medicine that will be closed very soon. It creates more problem than anything. It's still controversial, but the fact is that there are all kinds of problems. And the history of transfusion, of course, is a history of horror when you start looking at what was done. But anyway, now what you say about the empirical, namely different populations and the way in which they relate to each other, it's in itself fascinating that one can make the distinction between truth and morality. And that, as you say, people have, in fact, a way of living together whether or not they adhere to the same truth. In other words, to say, I have the truth and you don't, is not yet a prescription for genocide. It's simply a way of negotiating. After all, the people who think that medical transfusion is the truth, they don't say, I have the truth, you don't, but that's how they act. Yes? So Jehovah's Witnesses don't have a religion, they are wrong. And we know modern medicine, we have the truth. Now what that says is that you can have the truth even if it's not about religion. And you can still coexist. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses might not be very happy, but they're not persecuted in most places. They're not, they're not put in camps and they're not killed. So it's possible to disagree on truth and still live together. It's important to remember that, because the moment you speak about religion, it's as if it is the ground of all violence. And I don't know how you feel, but I'm under the impression that violence can be deployed in the name of anything you want. Yes? Not just God. Sure, God too. Why not? But, anything. You can go to war for oil. You can go to war for commerce. You can go to war for race. You can go to war because you feel like it. You can go to war because you don't like what's happening in Mali, and all kinds of things. You can go to war for any reason, and you can even go to war for no reason. Is that what you were saying?
No,
for soccer. And for no reason, which is a very close tie with soccer. But it is fascinating to me that religion would be the privileged side of violence. And of course, it's a secular prejudice, yes? Religion is really bad, because of course, secular people, they don't go to war, they don't massacre anybody, they don't bomb anybody, they don't do anything wrong. They just, because they don't believe in, religion. I mean, it's silly. It's really a level of argument that is silly. So I'm glad you point out that, in fact, it's possible to be together and have a very different rapport to truth, and also a very different rapport to others. And at that level, I don't believe that there's any essential thing that makes it impossible for that to be the case. But Western Christendom appears to have more problem. Yes, Western Europe is not exactly the place you look to if you want to know what the history of coexistence is. Yes, if you want to know what coexistence is between different religious groups, between different cultures, different languages, the place you want to look at is, in fact, the Balkans, India, Africa, everywhere really, except in Europe, where since the Middle Ages, they keep taking people who are different and killing them, burning them, converting them, expelling them. It's an interesting thing, no? That the seat of world tolerance today is the place where the most violent history of intolerance and the most consistent history of intolerance has been practiced. Clearly, it's not about religion. It's about a certain, we can call it culture, we can call it religion, we can call it Christianity. I think there's something about Western Christianity that is peculiar in the way in which it relates to all kinds of things. It's singular.
I would like to continue in terms of which Professor Vukomanovic have spoken, namely about sacrifice, because I think that sacrificial aspect of the meaning of blood is the central one here. And that is something which can link us with the basic biblical tradition of the Old Testament and with the primitive Christianity of the New Testament. But it can help us too to see the difference which lies there between the medieval Western Christianity and early Christianity of the New Testamental Church and of the first millennium. So, sacrifice. Blood is important in the Old Testament because it is the medium of sanctifying grace. So, through blood, we participate in divine sancticity. We offer blood to God, and He gives us His sanctifying grace. That's the concept of the Old Testament. So, but it is important that blood is not just mediums. It is not saint or sacramental in itself. In early Christianity, basic concept is the one of Christ's sacrifice. But that which is especially important regarding His sacrifice is that His sacrifice is self-sacrifice, because He is not just a priest and the sacrifice and the offering, but He is also the God who receives that sacrifice. He is God, He is priest, and He is sacrifice, He is offering. And that is something which is especially stressed if we speak about the difference between Western and Eastern tradition in Eastern liturgy. Even today, in our liturgical text, we have that thought, that sentence about Christ, who is at the same time God, priest, and true offering. But I think that if we look closely to that fact, that we can understand then the mentality of the early church, and to see why blood, Christ's blood, became the sign of community, and why the concept of blood came to mean something much broader than in its linguistic form. That's why we can speak about money as the offering, because by if we send our money to the saints in Jerusalem in the first century, well, we show that we are the same blood with them, so it means that we are sanctified by Christ's sacrifice on the cross. So we speak about blood as the sign of the community, which is realized through Christ's sacrifice on the cross. Blood here is just the sign. I think that is what is important. Same as the body is the sign of the reality, which is performed, in fact, by God Himself. So we have only to put that sign on us. We can do anything more for that reality. We can just participate in it. God gave Himself for us, so we can receive that offering, and that's the only thing which we can do. But as we go to the medieval period, there is one concept which can help us to understand that shift which happened in the Western Christianity, and that is the linking of the concept of Christ's sacrifice with the Roman concept of justice in juridical terms, strictly juridical. So we have in the medieval period development of the doctrine of satisfactory sacrifice of Christ. So here Christ is not at the same time priest, God, priest, and the sacrifice, but He is priest and the sacrifice, and the one who receives His sacrifice is the Father, who is in heaven and who is just, and Christ offers Himself in order to satisfy God's wrath because of the sin of the of our forefathers. So we have here one, I think, important moment which can act some changes in mentality, in the understanding of Christians in their self-understanding. So here we are not just, let's say, passive in our relation with God's sacrifice. We are not just those who enjoy the fruits of his sacrifice, but we are also one that has to do something in order to fulfill that commandment, which is affected by God's, in fact, wrath, because he is just, and you can't do anything if he is not satisfied. You have, in all that period, completely different development in other parts of Christian world. For example, you have one example would be Semitic Christianity in ancient Syria. In that time, it was governed by Persia. And for example, you have some Christian writers that speak about complete
exclusiveness.
Mutual exclusiveness of concept of justice and love. Saint Isaac the Syrian, he says that you can, if you can put hay and fire together, then you can put justice and love together. But because God is love, then there is no place for justice in God. Yeah? So there, Christian faith and Christian religion has nothing to do with justice. But you have the completely different development in Western Christianity. Of course, borderline between Eastern and Western here, in terms of Balkans and Europe. Today's Europe is not so clear. It's not so bold, because basic concepts are present in both spheres, but they are much more stressed in one than in the other. So my point is that we have to think about sacrificial aspect, about difference between some basic concepts of God and of sacrifice. If we try to map and to see what is the real reason for the importance of the concept of blood in Christian cultures and traditions. So thank you.
I mean, there's a part of me that wants to go empirical here, in the sense that what you describe, and I have no argument with the logic that you describe, namely that the conflation of sacrifice and justice and the transformation of the addressee of the sacrifice makes an enormous difference. One of the historical moments that interest me in the Middle Ages is precisely the institutionalization of the sacrament, right? And with the really the massification, right? We're talking about a disciplinary revolution where every Christian has to take the Eucharist and to participate in the Eucharist. One of the things, and you'll see that this is not at all at the conceptual level, but it does pick up on what you said, namely that we are not passive. One has to act in order to, in fact, reach the place where one is supposed to be. Now, and become, in fact, part of the collective, right? It's not that one can take for granted that one is already accepted into the church, but rather the sacrifice is that which brings one into the community.
Here the action comes from the exception, but here you have to act in order to become accepted.
Right.
So
Right. Now, one of the really amazing things that happen with the distribution of the Eucharist is that the priests had to tell, and this I know about, again, Western Europe. I don't know, and I'd be interested in knowing what happens elsewhere, as in here. When people are given the wine to drink, they start thinking that the blood of Christ is really in them, and therefore they don't need to take it anymore, right? In other words, the act, you remember vegetarian carnivore, being and doing, the doing becomes a one-time event. And after that, it's a little like the Enlightenment. I don't know if you've noticed. After the Enlightenment, the West changed. It's a one-time conversion. Since then, the West does no wrong. But, you know, metanoia, if I'm not mistaken, is a process whereby you need to prove that you have, in fact, changed. It's not like you can say, that's it, born again, goodbye, now I can go and do whatever I want. No, you need to continue enacting. And one of the transformations that happen is precisely that people start thinking that they have now a new nature. They are themselves of divine nature, no longer participating in a collective act, but rather defined of themselves. Which is where, by the way, the Luther thing with life, yes, with blood and life, I think is very important. Because if blood is life and life is divine, then that's it. You're done. You don't need to do anything. It's not an accident, of course, that it's at that moment in history that the Christian West starts, in fact, saying that Jews, among others, have a different kind of blood, a tainted blood, impure blood, and that therefore all kinds of things shouldn't happen. Yes, it's not only in Spain. In fact, you may remember that when Shylock is due to receive his judgment, the way in which he is beaten is precisely because he's told, you can have the flesh, but you can't touch Christian blood. It's Christian blood. It's not just the Spaniards who were crazy about Christian blood. Even Shakespeare apparently thought that there was such a thing. And to say that there's such a thing as Christian blood is to say that there's a difference between Christian blood and non-Christian blood. Now, this is when blood becomes the life, because your life is what Thomas Maschnack actually wrote about this very, very interestingly, that, as you know, to be a man of the church means you cannot use iron, you cannot kill, yes? Well, after a little while, it turns out that some blood is okay. And that not only that, but it's a good thing to kill. Bernard of Clairvaux participates in the logic of the Crusades by saying, to spill the blood of the infidel, that's fine. This, you can be a man of the church, and right, there's a transformation. Now, it relates, of course, to the transformation of the concept of justice, right, what you described. But there's also something that seems to happen at multiple levels. But I mean, you're making me think, and I need to reflect on how is it, if there is going to be a why the transformations that have occurred in Western Christendom, which I'm afraid by now are much more widespread. It's half a joke, but it's not really. The first section of the book on blood is called "Why I'm Such a Good Christian." Now, most of my friends know I'm not really a Christian, but I think that it's not a matter of what my religion is. It is a question of what world we live in, and I do think that Western Christendom has taken over huge parts of our existence, and that is part of the problem. That is why it needs to be criticized. We need to know what it is that has taken us over. But certainly, to answer the question why, would certainly have to begin with where you direct me, and I think that thank you. It's